Welcome back to Inside Politics. We're looking at Thursday's election and what it means, what happens going forward. Our guest is Professor Marc Schwerdt from Lipscomb University. Professor, Bill Lee very much had in several of his television spots his religious faith. He began one of his ads with the words out of his mouth, and Jesus said. I don't think I've ever heard a candidate in Tennessee actually, they quote the Bible, but they don't generally quote, and Jesus said. Do you think that religious angle is going to continue to be a prominent role of the Bill Lee campaign in the fall?
I think it's so central to him that he can't abandon it, obviously, but I don't think it's as prominent as it will be, because I think when you're looking at the typical Republican voter now, the idea that, okay, I'm going to be very open about who I am, because they've had this feeling of I've had to hide who I am, or that I'm going to be ridiculed or something like that if I show faith, or if I show conservatism, or if I show something else, that they feel persecuted.
But showing it in the primary is one thing, particularly with the evangelical vote, but in the general election, you have a different mix of audience.
He'll soften that.
Carl Dean, I think there was some concern on the Democratic side that their race might just disappear because there was so much interest in the Republican race. Do you think Carl Dean did a good enough campaign, particularly keeping his visibility up, that that gives him at least some potential to be viable in the fall?
I think it certainly does. I mean, again, he was on the television enough. He's certainly trying to draw attention to, okay, we're going to talk about local issues. He talks about the forgotten people. He talks about the marginalized.
Is the forgotten Tennessee theme one we're going to continue to see throughout the rest of the race?
I think we have to, because on the national level, which is where you might otherwise go, things are in very good shape. Things are in very good shape in terms of the economic situation, especially.
Before we leave the governor's race, what happened to Randy Boyd? He certainly spent more money than anybody in the history of the state to run for governor. He spent $20 million of his own dollars, yet he didn't. He finished 12 points behind.
Right. I think that was, he seemed like an insider. This was the backlash towards, okay, because Boyd got kind of desperate at the end. You know, he showed that he was going to go a little bit more negative. He showed he was going to be more Trumpian. He showed he was going to be a little bit more, he's going to talk about his faith a little bit.
And some people who knew him didn't think that was necessarily the person they knew.
Right. And so it comes across as insincere. And I think, again, that's Bill Lee's biggest asset, is his
House
sincerity.
Speaker Beth Harwell, the other candidate in the race, never seemed to gel. She wanted to talk a lot about what she'd done in the state already to do the things that Donald Trump's trying to do in Washington, but that didn't seem to be what the voters wanted to hear.
It's not about what you had done, it's about what you are going to be in support of. And also, Speaker Harwell, by the rules of our state, wasn't able to really get into the race until the session was done. So she got kind of a late start in terms of being able to devote a lot of time and energy towards the race itself, and it ended up hurting her, given that there were three such powerful candidates who had a lot of resources available to them and not the same restraints.
Lots of money spent in the governor's race, a record $50 million, and we haven't started the general election.
Right.
Does it now mean if you're running for governor in Tennessee or any kind of statewide effort, spending all your money doesn't mean you're going to win, but if you don't have a certain amount of millions of dollars, you can't even get a stake to be a legitimate candidate?
It's certainly going to be something people are going to look towards. The thing that really encouraged private spending, personal spending this time, was the fact that there were so many different candidates. Nobody knew who they wanted to give to. So the big donors, or the average donor, pretty much stayed on the sidelines on this one.
We didn't see a lot of outside money, a little bit in the governor's race. Are we going to see a lot more in that, and even more so in the Senate race?
That's what both Democrats and Republicans have been saying, and that's what the big liberal and also conservative groups have been saying. We should see a lot of attention pushed on this, because Democrats feel like this is a state that they can win a Senate seat in. And given the margins within the Senate as it is right now, 51-49, and several key strategic retirements and things like that, this will become a big focus.
But is it overstating it that this could be the seat that decides who organizes the next Senate? Because the Democrats have so many seats to defend in states that Donald Trump won in 2016.
They do, but this would be one of those states. So either, you know, even with that kind of margin of victory that he had in 2016, and a lot of people who are under some sort of duress and some sort of threat because they're now Democrat held, certainly the onus is on the Democrats. But the Republicans really need to make sure, because they've got a lot of splits within themselves.
Both Marcia Blackburn and Phil Bredesen easily won their primaries last night against token opposition, but it's interesting to compare their numbers. Phil Bredesen got 348,000 plus votes. Marcia Blackburn got 610,000 votes. That's you really can't. We talked about the difference in primary size, but that's a pretty striking number. I mean, yes, there's some people that the total primary was less than the overall size for her. So there were some Republicans who didn't vote for her yesterday, but that's quite a gap that Phil Bredesen has still got to figure out a way to narrow coming into November.
Sure, but a lot of that comes from the Republicans had a competitive primary. The Democrats really didn't. So Republicans.
So do you think she'll have trouble bringing some of those people that voted in the Republican primary for governor back to come vote for her in November?
I don't think that'll be her problem. I think her problem again is among independents. I think it'll be a very close race. Bredesen is very popular among independents and among Democrats themselves. And, you know, as he was able to show in 2006, he won re-election to governor with a very large margin. So he is very popular.
Looking at that, he came back on the air on television pretty early in his campaign in the spring. Marcia Blackburn just started her TV this week. I think Bredesen has been pretty successful in reintroducing himself to the electorate. Did Marcia Blackburn make a mistake waiting this late to let him be on the air all by himself for this long?
I don't think so, because there's still a lot of things that can happen between, of course. You know, it's beginning of August. This doesn't happen until early November. So that gives her 3 months. And she's already well known in some major stretches of the state. On the other hand, things kind of work with her because there are several things that will happen to bring about, okay, this is an important Senate seat. We're talking about a possible Supreme Court fight, which again brings the Senate back into the force. It raises this level up to the national level. We've got some other economic numbers that will come out, and for those who care, things that are happening in Washington, you know, with the Mueller investigation, with all these other things, that's really going to play a role, I think, in the enthusiasm level of both Republicans and Democrats.
Professor Marc Schwerdt of Lipscomb University is our guest on Inside Politics. We're talking about the Thursday primary, what happens going towards November. We've talked about the governor's race. Now we're talking about the Senate race. More conversation after this break.